Lady Arya arrived at the cabin door of the Avalanche. She sighed deeply as Bran had been treated for a day and a night. She thrust the door open, and Lady Mira seemed startled.
How is he?
Arya asked, and Lady Mira's face seemed to drop as the ship swayed briskly to starboard.
We've reached the limits of the aid we have on board. His last remaining leg was properly amputated, but his fever and weakness remain. A clear sign of blood poisoning, I'm sorry to say.
Mira finished, and Arya deliberately held her response. Mira never spoke of the years she escorted Bran beyond the wall. All Arya knew was that Mira cared for Bran like a sister, and for that, Arya treated Mira like family. They could hear Nymeria howling as the ship continued to sway and rock.
He needs a proper healer, one much more talented than anyone we have on board.
Mira continued as she dabbed Bran's sweaty brow. His consciousness would continuously shift, but he would wake just a few times per day. Arya's heart broke as she looked down to the bloody stump that previously held Bran's last remaining leg. The only solace she could take was the fact that Bran felt no pain during its removal. Unfortunately, Arya was present when he lost his first leg during the battle for Winterfell many years ago. The door burst open as a sailor passed a message that Ser Davos requested her presence topside. Arya gave Mira's shoulder a slight squeeze, showing appreciation for her loyalty to Bran. Arya sprang towards the cabin door and sprinted up the ladder leading her topside. She proceeded to the helm where the staunch Ser Davos held his nose high, taking in the smell of the sea. Arya glanced at the charts and noted the numerous treks possible from their current position. Ser Davos and the quartermaster obviously had numerous different bearings in mind for the final leg of their voyage home.
You sent for me, Ser Davos?
Lady Arya asked, and Ser Davos seemed not to hear her. Only when Arya looked in the same direction did she notice what had commandeered the Onion Knight's attention. A severe storm had swelled on the horizon, and Lady Arya was now as concerned as Ser Davos.
I assume you have recommendations on our course, sir?
Indeed I do, Your Grace. It's never wise to sail into the mouth of a storm. We could head on a more southerly course and moor in King's Landing, perhaps a week later than scheduled, or head farther north to Hardhome and wait for the storm to pass.
Thunder and lightning crashed upon the darkening horizon as Arya pondered their course. An added week to their journey would put Bran's life in even greater risk than he was currently in. Arya weighed the risk, but preferred Ser Davos's experience in this matter.
If we sail around the oncoming storm, we will need a septon for Bran rather than a maester.
That may be true, Your Grace, but the septon will be called upon to pray for all our souls, not just Lord Brandon.
Ser Davos met Lady Arya's eye as she attempted to measure his degree of apprehension. She did not come this far to have Bran pass away in a cargo hold. She thought of her brother Robb, Rickon, and her dearest parents as her misty eyes rose and ordered,
Full canvas then, Ser Davos. We sail through the belly of the stranger. Either we port in Eastwatch or be condemned to the deep.
As you will, Your Grace.
Just as Arya ordered her men and ship into harm's way, Mira approached her in a panic. The sails flapped and screamed violently as Arya and Mira made their way back to Bran's bedside. The pair of ladies burst through the door to find Bran awake but feeble and weak. Arya dashed to his bedside and lowered her ear to hear Bran's faint words of warning.
Jon, tell Jon that his cousin comes for him, for all of us. He must rally all of the kingdoms, not only the north.
Arya's heart dropped, realizing their family would once again meet the sweet kiss of a mistress named Vengeance. Bran was convulsing to the point his sweat sprung from his brow.
Gendry, the king has been taken to the wall, Arya. He is weak, so very weak. Viserys desires his blood. Sister, go to your king.
Bran's voice trailed off as tears streamed from Arya's face. She was confused because Gendry was in King's Landing, last she had heard. Perhaps it was the poppy speaking, Arya thought to herself. The ship swayed again to port, even more violently than before. The Avalanche had finally sailed amongst the swells and winds. It took her much longer to work her way up the ladder. The hatch leading topside was spuriously illuminated with the close aboard lightning strikes. The wind howled and swirled around the avalanche as Arya earned her way topside. Sir Davos manned the helm himself, braving the horizontal rain and strained canvas. Arya was beginning to regret her decision, but it was Bran's best chance at survival. At best, they could sail through the storm in half a day. Likely Sir Davos would refuse to head below decks until such a time. The wind made communication between the two of them difficult, but the Onion Knight made it clear he would not be deserting the helm, nor dropping canvas. They had the wind at their backs, and the old sailor was keen to take advantage. Arya then retreated to the safety of her cabin as the wind continued to howl and swirl. The candles were out, and the only light came from the same fierce lightning bolts. Arya stumbled slightly due to the swells beating the hull of the avalanche. It was only after stumbling when she realized that she was not alone in the captain's cabin. She drew catspaw and spun on the spot. Before a breath could be drawn, she held her blade at the throat of the intruder. The familiar belly laugh resonated within her. It was from her youth, but she could not place it. Once she recognized the bright white teeth and charming smile, she squealed like a young child.
Syrio.
Arya beckoned with a gleeful smile. Syrio Forel stood before her, booming with teacher's pride and obviously noting Arya's deeply scarred face.
I have a lifetime of stories to tell you. All I am, I owe to my dancing master. However, did you find your way on board?
Lady Arya asked with an innocent intrusiveness as she sheathed her blade.
A girl always stumbles her way upon the truth, does she not?
Syrio's words weighed heavy on Arya's heart. She wheeled about to a defensive posture, but before she would draw, her dancing master held a thin blade to her own throat. Arya gulped deeply before she spoke.
You're a liar. You're no Syrio.
Arya accused to the deep chuckle of the first sword of Braavos.
As I've said before, my child, my tongue may have lied, but the eyes will always reveal the truth.
Syrio replied as his voice distorted. Arya was mortified as Syrio peeled away his face to reveal the only man Arya feared. He would commonly refer to himself as only a man.
No, not you. Was Syrio Forel ever real?
Arya demanded with the intruder's blade still at her throat.
Perhaps for a time. But why would a girl be so concerned?
I am not just a girl. I am Arya Stark, the daughter of the North, soon to be the Queen of Westeros. I am someone, and I always was.
And a man was always aware this day would come.
Arya knew this was not the way of the Faceless Men. Their victims often met the stranger before even knowing they had died, or who was responsible for their demise. Something was odd here, and she was determined to find out.
Harrenhal at the gate, you offered more than what was due to the Red God.
Arya reminded Jaqen of their previous bargain. It was a gamble, but Arya was likely out of options.
The guards at the gate, you had no contract on them. But you took them anyway. Your god has a surplus, which would now allow mercy on your part.
Arya begged, but with a prideful voice. Jaqen seemed to be pondering her point of view. It was a desperate attempt to escape the situation. Arya thought of her mother, and what dealing she had offered when she knew her life was near its end at the twins. Remarkably, Jaqen Hagar withdrew his blade from Arya's throat.
So a girl remembers.
A proper trait among Northmen.
Arya replied defiantly as she calmly tried to regain her escaped breath.
I do have questions. Was Syrio ever real?
Jaqen seemed intrigued at the question, but he simply shrugged his shoulders as he responded.
For a time, the first sword of Braavos was indeed his own man. Until another thought, he was more useful to us, rather than to himself.
Arya felt sick. She had never known the real Syrio, only Jaqen, hired by her father. Why Jaqen? Always Jaqen.
I will allow 2 more questions before I depart in peace.
Arya pondered his offer. Although the deception in her youth was difficult to swallow, Arya knew Jaqen had always kept his word. She would need to proceed with cunningness to maximize her return on this bargain.
You're an assassin, capable of any disguise. How was it you became captured and regulated to the Black Cells?
It was indeed by design. The Coin Master drowned the realm in debt in order to pay for our services. It was never my intention to kill, but to be killed.
Arya felt sick as her stomach rose into her throat. It made sense. The coinmaster was Littlefinger. He betrayed her father, Lord Eddard, leading to his arrest. Jaqen was in the black cells to take her father's place under the executioner's block. An expensive undertaking, to be sure, but one the scheming Peter Baelish had planned for years in advance as he bankrupted the realm. Arya braced herself at this news, but it left much more to be explained. She had one question remaining, but Jaqen seemed to desire to be helpful in his own way.
That makes little sense. If my father was to have faked his death, there would be no profit for Littlefinger.
Jaqen smiled slightly as he could infer Arya was eliciting more information than what they had bargained for. He seemed impressed she did not accidentally waste her last question, so he inclined to continue to oblige her.
That was not the coinmaster's intention. He intended to start a war, and to smuggle the very much alive Stark out of the capital as a means of ending the war at a time of his choosing, until he was outmaneuvered by the eunuch.
Arya knew this to be Lord Varys. He convinced Lord Eddard to confess his alleged treason for the sake of his daughters, something Littlefinger had not anticipated. This unexpected and rare occurrence of deception by Lord Eddard caught Littlefinger by surprise and led to a premature execution before Jaqen could take Lord Eddard's place in the black cells. The wind continued to howl and lightning filled the room as Arya sat in silence, assuming Jaqen was waiting for his last question.
Why then? Why me? Why recruit me? Why train me? Why did you encourage me to become no one?
The coinmaster was aware the Night's Watchman was an ally to Lord Stark, perhaps the only in the city that was not cut down in the throne room. After your disappearance, we assumed that would be your way north, and we were correct.
That explains the how, but not the why.
House Stark would die alongside Lord Eddard. What should have been a lengthy and costly war would now end prematurely. The coinmaster wanted to harness your need for revenge, to mold you into one of us, to eventually return to Westeros and reignite the flames of war.
He knew I was still alive?
The coinmaster was much more aware than he let on. Once he recognized you at Harrenhal, he guaranteed payment to bring you to Braavos and train you as one of us, until it was time for you to return and seek your vengeance.
Arya had heard enough. Everything she was, everything she had endured was all part of Littlefinger's plan. The sweet sense of revenge again filled her heart as she remembered wiping his blood from her blade so many years ago.
The jaded are the simplest to predict, and therefore the easiest to control.
Arya felt the urge to draw frost from her belt and thread Jaqen's throat like the eye of a needle. Still she resisted. Violence would be too predictable at this point, considering Jaqen had already offered her mercy.
That's why you allowed me to leave Braavos. It was time to return, or so Littlefinger had allowed.
It was a statement rather than a question, and Jaqen simply nodded in agreement. He made his way for the door, and Arya was confused as she followed him out into the storm. The winds and rains cut against her face as he made his way to the deserted helm. Sir Davos had locked the wheel and lowered all sails. Arya had so many more questions that would never be answered. Her life to this point was all part of a schemer's manipulation. She was a weapon of war to be wielded by those who themselves refused to fight. Jaqen effortlessly leapt upon the banister on the aft section of the ship. He gazed back at Arya with the same blank stare she remembered as a child, never knowing if it represented satisfaction, disgust, or approval. She simply smiled at him, and then him to her. His eyes suddenly shifted behind her as a trident was thrust in his direction. He had just enough time to turn his shoulder before he leapt from the ship into the narrow sea below.
2 of ship's company were found dead. Who was that man?
Lady Mira informed Arya, to which she simply responded.
He was no one.